Round 3 of the Phoenix Festival Tournament has begun, and things are certainly starting to heat up. As always, use the links in the description below to go and vote for who you think would win in each match and give your reasoning as to why. Whether it's experience, semblance, weapon advantage, etc., a reason has to be given for each of your choices. Now moving into our first match of the day, we have Marrow Eamon versus Neon Cat in the Forest and Desert biomes. Now this fight is already at a massive experience difference between these two characters. Neon is still a student at Atlas Academy, where Marrow is already a graduate and a member of the Ace Ops, so one of the more skilled huntsmen in Atlas already. So with this experience difference, Neon probably doesn't have much of a chance, though if she was able to use the forest biome to her advantage and avoid Marrow's stay, we are going to assume that everyone is aware of Marrow's semblance by this point, by the amount of people that quoted that Marrow would have to use his semblance to win against his previous matches, such as Vernal, so Neon might be able to use this to her advantage, though with the way that she moves on her rollerblades, she would definitely be at a huge disadvantage in the desert biome, so having to stick either to center stage or the forest biome, this could get a bit interesting. In the forest biome, having grass under her feet wouldn't really be great for rollerblades either, so her mobility would be limited, and with her weapons of the nunchucks that she uses, she would still have to get close range to Marrow, at which point Marrow could just use his weapon of fetch to start firing long range at her, as he does have long range capabilities, plus if she came into his line of sight, he could always use stay and stop her momentum, though we aren't exactly sure how much Marrow can move while he is using his semblance. Because when he's used it in the RWBY series, he used it first in episode 3 of volume 7 when the Aesops were fighting against all the Sentinels, he used his semblance to stop two Sentinels' movements and Harriet had to run up and attack them. So we can assume that Marrow can't really move that well while using his semblance. One thing that his weapon does allow, though, considering Fetch is a boomerang, is that he could throw his weapon outwards, stop an opponent's momentum, have the boomerang hit them, and then stop his semblance, so then he can catch his weapon. So that is something that his weapon allows him to do, a little bit of versatility added in with his semblance, but Marrow's semblance does work best when he has someone else to support him. I do think he would win out against Neon, but Neon wouldn't be completely helpless in this fight. If she's able to use the environment and Marrow's semblance and the way that it works to her advantage, she could hold some sort of a chance, but I think Marrow would take this fight overall. And then we get to the highlight match of the day, Qrow Branwen versus Glynda Goodwitch in the Forest and Urban biomes. These two would be an insane fight to see on screen. Both of them, I would argue, are equally skilled, if not Glynda maybe a little bit more skilled, being Ozpin's right hand, but Qrow Branwen being a huntsman who's more of a lone hunter out in the world on his own, still a member of Ozpin's inner circle. Both of them are extremely skilled, Qrow fighting with his Harbinger and his Misfortune, Glynda fighting with her the Disciplinarian, but she doesn't really use that as much of a weapon, she more relies on her semblance of telekinesis, which is extremely powerful. And being in the forest and urban biomes, well, the urban biome, from what we saw, having a few collapsed buildings in it, she would have lots of ammunition, like rubble and things that she can move around. We've seen her move pretty much entire city blocks before with her semblance of telekinesis, so that could definitely deal a lot of damage against Qrow. Though Qrow is a very fast fighter, and we've seen that when he's fighting with his weapon, he can easily cut through concrete, rock, and things like that. So he would be able to pretty much dodge or blast through anything that Glynda was able to throw at him, and it would all come down to how well Qrow could avoid Glynda's semblance. This would be an absolutely insane fight, and I could see going either way. When it comes to Qrow's Misfortune, there's not really much about Glynda that he would be able to affect. She's very sturdy on her feet. She wouldn't really get tripped up that easily into the urban biome, so I don't think his Misfortune would cause her to trip in any way, shape, or form. Maybe miss with some of the throws that she has, throwing debris or trees if anything is knocked down in the forest biome at Qrow. Maybe his semblance would cause her throws to be a bit off-center, but the amount of debris that Glynda would be able to throw at Qrow, the likelihood of it missing even with the Misfortune active, would be fairly low. So Qrow would have to rely on his weapon and reflexes to try to avoid this debris, get close to Glynda, as his weapon is more close range. He does have long-range capabilities, there is a gun function in Harbinger, but it probably wouldn't do much against Glynda. She would likely be able to dodge out of the way, and it would be a very difficult fight for either of them to win. But a draw isn't an option, and I would probably say that Qrow would defeat Glynda, though that doesn't exactly sound right. Even saying Glynda defeats Qrow doesn't exactly sound right, so this would come down to a very, very close match. Glynda, the more she used her telekinesis, would be draining her aura, and Qrow trying to get close to Glynda, dodging all of the things that Glynda was throwing at him with her telekinesis, possibly being able to throw Qrow around as well. There are a couple instances of Glynda being able to manipulate people's bodies with her telekinesis, so this would be an insane fight, and I really want to know what your guys' thoughts are, both through the voting and in the comments below, because this one is extremely close. I feel like either one of them could win this, and out of all of the matches so far, this would be the one I would call a draw, but a draw isn't an option, so I would probably have to go with Qrow, just because he has more damage-dealing capabilities and would be able to either block or dodge most of the things that Glynda would be able to throw at him, though if Glynda is able to manipulate his body and throw him backwards, avoid him getting close to her, then, you know, things could turn out very differently. I think Qrow might slightly win this one, but I look forward to seeing the results of the voting because, honestly, this one could go either way, so make sure to let me know. Our next match is Bartholomew Oobleck versus May Marigold in the urban and anti-gravity biomes. Now, Bartholomew Oobleck, professor at Beacon Academy, very skilled huntsman, and May Marigold, member of the Happy Huntresses. She is also a graduated huntsman from Atlas Academy. So both of these two are likely on equal footing when it comes to skill level, though I would argue that Oobleck has maybe a bit more experience. He is a bit older, and also being a professor at Beacon Academy is no small feat in and of its own right. We don't know Oobleck's semblance, but we do know his weapon, Antiquity's Roast, that is more of a club combined with a flamethrower that's also his thermos, and May Marigold fights with the standard weapon of the Happy Huntresses, that is a staff that has blades and a crossbow on each end of it, and her semblance of invisibility field is definitely useful when it comes to hiding her presence from others, as it blocks out not only the visual but the sound as well within that invisibility field. So it's a very useful semblance and could definitely be used by her to avoid being seen by Oobleck. She could hide in the urban biome, but I don't really see her being able to deal that much damage to Oobleck to be able to beat him. If Oobleck is able to get close, and May, using her invisibility field, would constantly be draining her aura, so she would have to either try to make this long range, but by firing crossbow bolts at Oobleck, that would alert Oobleck to where she is, and with his flamethrower, he would be able to get close enough to her. Well, with just his mobility, he would be able to get close enough to her, use his flamethrower and club, and probably end up dealing enough damage to her. This would be a more drawn-out fight, I would think, back and forth, moving between biomes, and more Oobleck trying to chase after May, May trying to keep this more long-range, because in a close-range combat, I don't think May would have the advantage over Oobleck. His club would probably be a little bit stronger than May's standard weapon of the Happy Huntresses, so I think she would have to try to keep this long-range, and longer range than Oobleck's flamethrower would allow, so I think Oobleck would eventually win out over May, especially if she started overusing her semblance and things like that. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are through the voting. And then we have Sun Wukong versus Nebula Violet in the Savannah and Lava biomes. A little bit of a rematch between Team Sun and Team Indigo, as their respective leaders are facing each other now. Now, we did get a bit of an expansion on both of these characters in Before the Dawn. Nebula is an extremely skilled fighter, even fighting with weapons that she is not accustomed to. She was able to overpower Velvet when Velvet was using her semblance of photographic memory to fight with multiple fighting styles, and switch between them at the same time. And Sun, fighting with his Ruyi Bang and Jingu Bang, his gunchucks, is a very fast and skilled fighter. With the amount of blows that he'd be able to deal against opponents, and not to mention the shotgun blast that would also be coming along with that, he can easily outpace opponents in close combat. So I think Nebula, fighting with her crossbow that is also a sword, would be at a bit of a disadvantage if she kept this close range. Sun would be able to overwhelm her very easily, so she would have to keep this long range. And with her crossbow, she might be able to, well, deal a little bit of damage against Sun, but trying to keep this long range, I think Sun would be able to dodge out of the way of the crossbow bolts, and fighting in the Savannah and Lava biomes wouldn't really pose much of an advantage to either of them. Sun also has his semblance, which gives him another leg up, where he can create multiple clones of himself, but he does need to focus to be able to do that. And we also found out in Before the Dawn that he is able to fight alongside his clones. He was able to create 2 clones at the beginning of the story and fight alongside them against 3 separate opponents. Now, it does take a lot of focus to be able to coordinate the movements of each of the clones and keep the focus on his own opponent as well, but with only one opponent that he would need to focus on, creating these clones gives him a numbers advantage on top of everything else, so I think Sun would take this fight overall. Then we get to Miltia Malachite versus Banesaw, the White Fang Lieutenant, in the Geyser and Ocean biomes. Now, with Banesaw, he's a lot stronger than Miltia. We saw in Volume 2 that he was able to take out Weiss with his chainsaw blade and everything like that. Weiss was a much faster opponent at that time, but Banesaw was still able to take her out. Miltia is a faster opponent than Banesaw. I would say she's probably not as fast as Weiss, considering Weiss was using her glyphs to accelerate her own momentum, but Miltia fighting with her claws is definitely a fast opponent nonetheless, faster than Banesaw. And I think largely one of the reasons that Banesaw was able to beat Weiss back in Volume 2 was because of the place that they were fighting in. They were in a train car that didn't have that much space to move around in, and Banesaw with his chainsaw blade could use wide, sweeping attacks, as we saw in Volume 2, and with Weiss not being able to use her full mobility, I think that was part of the reason, at least, why Banesaw was able to win. He's still a very strong and skilled opponent, but having the open arena and the different biomes to work in, not that the Geyser or Ocean biomes would really play a factor much in this fight, maybe just give more space for them to move around in, Miltia would be able to dodge out of the way of Banesaw's blade a lot easier. So she would have more of a chance of winning against Banesaw, but with the utility that Weiss has and Banesaw being able to beat her, I find it hard to believe that Banesaw would lose against Miltia Malachite in this fight. Though I could still see Miltia winning if she's able to dodge out of the way of Banesaw's blade, but I think Banesaw just has more skill overall. And the power, if he is able to land a hit against Miltia, that would probably end the fight right there. But let me know your thoughts on that one. And then we have Vernal versus Lai Ren. This is a fairly even matchup, I would argue. Vernal being essentially the second in command to Raven Branwen in the Branwen tribe, at least when she was still alive, and Lai Ren, now at the end of Volume 7, being a fully trained and licensed huntsman. I'd say they're on fairly equal skill levels. Both of them have long-range and close-range capabilities. Vernal, with her wind and fire blades, able to throw them out like boomerangs and they'll return to her. Plus they have lightning dust capabilities, she can use them for close-range combat. And Ren, with his storm flowers, being able to have long-range capabilities. They are guns in of themselves. He also has a grapple function where he can launch the pointed parts of it outwards, latch into the environment, and move himself around. Now, they are fighting in the desert and mountain biomes, so definitely in the mountain biomes and also in the desert there was a rock outcropping that we saw in Volume 3. There would be things that he could latch onto, use for mobility along with his storm flowers, and the blades could be for close combat as well. So this would be fairly even, though I think Ren wins out in long range because his Stormflower would be able to have longer range than I think the Lightning Dust from Vernal's weapons could, and Ren would be able to dodge out of the way of Vernal's blades if she threw them outwards, so I think that Ren would win out long range, but if it got to close range, especially if Ren was in the range of Vernal's Lightning Dust, well, we saw that Ren doesn't really fare all that well against lightning. In Volume 3, we did see that he got hit by Nolan's cattle prod, and the electricity did a fair amount of damage to him, so if he was hit by Vernal's electricity, that would probably spell the end of the fight for Ren, so this could go either way. I would think that Ren has more experience overall based on him having the training from the Aesops and the amount that he fought through on his way to Haven Academy as part of Team Ranger, so I think Ren might slightly win out over this fight, though again I could see this going either way. And then we get to our only fight in the doubles category, as we are very close to the grand finals for the doubles, and the winner of this fight will move on to the grand finals. We have Glynda Goodwitch and Sun Wukong versus Weiss Schnee and Fox Alistair. They are fighting in the forest and urban biomes. Again, giving a fair amount of ammunition to Glynda with the urban biomes and possibly being able to rip, trees out of the ground, fire them at opponents, etc. So this would be a very interesting fight. I would argue that Weiss is more skilled than Sun Wukong, as she's had the training from the Aesops and has had more of an accelerated learning experience with the amount that she's gone through versus Sun, even though both Sun and Fox in After the Fall and Before the Dawn have had a lot of experience fighting the Crown and have fought some underground organizations and some shady people along with that, so both of them are fairly skilled. I would argue Fox is more skilled than Sun as well. It just seems Team Coffee has more skill than Team Sun in general. And also, I think Team Coffee was also a year ahead of Team Sun, if I'm not mistaken. Team Coffee was ahead of Team RWBY, and I think Team Sun was the same year as Team RWBY, so I think Fox has more skill than Sun anyways. But Glynda Goodwitch is going to be the key factor in this fight, because she is definitely the most skilled person in this battle. So if Weiss and Fox are able to keep Glynda preoccupied while one of them deals with Sun, this is going to be a fairly close fight. Though I think Glynda, with her telekinesis and just barraging her opponents with the debris that would be around the battlefield, might be able to overwhelm Fox's assistive technology. Since he is blind, he does use technology from Atlas to get a reading on his environment, and I don't know if it would be able to keep up with a massive amount of debris that would be flying at him. So that might put him at a disadvantage. He is able to get a lot of environmental information, but if things are happening too quickly, I don't know if it would be able to keep up. Sun would probably lose out against Fox if that came to close combat. Sun does have a lot of speed when it comes to his attacks in close combat, but I think Fox, with just the power that he has and also the ability he displayed in Volume 2 to kind of send aura shockwaves into opponents, might be able to just blast through Sun's attacks, tank a couple of them, and just blast him through that and break his aura. But I don't really know if that would end up happening. If Sun ends up going up against Weiss, I think Weiss would be able to outmatch Sun because of her semblance of glyphs, not to mention if she's able to get off her summoning, that could also definitely play a role in this fight. Though Glynda, with her telekinesis, if she's able to manipulate people's bodies themselves, we have seen a couple times in the RWBY series, she did this with RWBY, and she did also manipulate Yatsuhashi in After the Fall, so this could be a factor. If she is able to manipulate people's bodies, that's going to be very difficult to overcome, but I think Glynda at the very least would be able to manipulate Weiss's summons and be able to throw them around the arena, and they might not play as much of a factor as Weiss would hope. Plus, she would also need the focus to be able to summon, and Glynda may not give her that. Similarly with Sun, as both of them are fairly fast fighters. Glynda doesn't really have to move to be fast. With her telekinesis, she can just start hucking debris. So I think Glynda and Sun do win out over Fox and Weiss, but it's another one that is extremely close. Weiss, with the amount of variability that she has using all the different types of dust, could easily overwhelm Glynda and break her concentration, because she does need the concentration to be able to manipulate all of the objects that she has with her telekinesis. If Weiss could more easily just throw out a fireball or ice shards or something like that, forcing Glynda to dodge, then she might not be able to manipulate all of the environment as much as she would like. So it would come down to a battle of concentration. If Weiss is able to concentrate on her summoning while Glynda is kept preoccupied, then Weiss might have the advantage, but if Glynda is able to keep concentration while using her telekinesis, then she would definitely have the advantage. So if both of their concentrations are kept off and it's kept to close combat, well, Glynda, we haven't seen her fight close combat. She relies on her semblance very much, and when she's manipulating like the air around opponents and things like that, she doesn't need as much concentration, so I still think Glynda and Sun win out, but this would be a very interesting fight, and this is another one that I would love to hear your thoughts on down in the comments below. So overall, these are the fights of day 1 of round 3, bracket A of the singles category and doubles category. Make sure you use the links in the description below and go and vote for who you think would win in each match. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these videos, the Phoenix Festival Tournament overall. Make sure to subscribe to keep up with everything going on. Join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7. Join our Discord server, linked also in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.